Now, I don't know whether you've noticed, but every week there seems to be some form of right-wing conference. Some weeks there are more than one. There's been one this week. It's where Kemi Badenoch was wanging on about Western values being under threat, a sort of version of Liz Truss's claim that we've only got 10 years to save the West, but not really able to tell us from what. I asked the Mayor of London about it a little earlier this week, and we both sort of thought, I think she means Muslims. But of course, she won't come out and say that yet. Maybe that's what Nigel Farage is talking about when he claims that there's no free speech or that free speech is under threat in this country. That one was in London. And then there's another one in America this week where Steve Bannon has given what appears to be a fascist salute and Liz Truss has said some words. I kind of found myself a little bit confused about the way that these things were reported. And always reported very seriously, as if there's some big symposium taking place, as if it's a great meeting of minds, when a lot of these people say, well, anyway, I don't want to put words into anybody's mouth. So Aggie Chambre made her way there to the ARC conference. What does it stand for, Aggie?
Alliance of Responsible Citizenship.
Oh, and this is Jordan Peterson's outfit.
This is Jordan Peterson's outfit, indeed.
The lobster man. And I just wanted to find out a little bit more about what happens at places like this.
Well, I'm genuinely disappointed to report, James, that there was nobody twirling a chainsaw on stage. So it is, by its very nature, a bit worse than the CPAC conference because, of course, Elon Musk went on stage earlier and was presented by the Argentine president with a chainsaw, and then he wandered around the stage with a chainsaw and sunglasses on. That didn't happen in London.
Do you know that's not even the maddest thing that's happened today?
What else has happened?
Jacob Rees-Mogg's daughter read Michael Gove's tarot cards live on television.
Wow, I don't... Well...
More on that as it breaks. More on that as it comes in. Carry on.
More on that as we get it. Well, anyway, it was in East London, this Alliance for Reliable Citizenship, much to the genuine horror of Douglas Murray, who got up on stage and lambasted East London and urged the international delegates to go a few miles down the road to see a beautiful historic city, because East London was not that. People there had paid between £450 to £1,500 to be there. And it was described as kind of cult-like. And the room, it was 3 times the size of last year. I had the pleasure of going last year as well. The room was kind of dark. The audience was very, very engaged. At one stage, there was one guy who got up on stage to sing a song that he'd written about the US government. He started off by saying, "We're all hurting. That's why we're all here. We realise it's time to do something." And then quite quickly, he brought out a guitar.
By God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for a bag of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down.
So
it's a narrative of eternal victimhood from people who can afford 1,500 quid for a ticket and to fly here from the United States of America to whine about how they're penalised and victimised and discriminated against, while also claiming that they're... Anyway, sorry.
I think that was genuinely one of the themes. I was trying to work out, when I was thinking this morning about talking to you about this, what the things that kept coming up were. And it was... their fear about net zero, their fear about the future of the West, the fear about Keir Starmer, fear about woke, mental health, assisted dying, or as it was referred to there, euthanasia. And, you know, Kemi Badenoch, you've talked about it on the show this week, but she talked there. And I pointed out to somebody that very, very recently her party was in power. And they said, yeah, but it's completely different. It's completely different. They're also all very worried about birth rates, which, you know, we do know are declining globally. Nigel Farage got up on stage, called for a rise in birth rates.
He goes to all of them. Is he ever in Clacton?
Good question.
They need. Listen, if you're in Clacton and you're worried about never seeing your MP, put on a very, very right-wing conference with decent fees for the speakers. He'll be there in a flash. There you go.
That's possibly true.
So he's telling people to have children.
He's telling, and so is the former president of Hungary, who actually asked people to stand up if they had more than 3 children. And when I was sitting, vox popping people, speaking to people, just outside the hall, one person asked how many kids I had. I said, none, and he looked very disappointed, asked if I had a boyfriend, and I should have said none of your business. Anyway, I told him I was engaged, and he seemed very relieved by that information. But that was the kind of theme. Those were the conversations going on about in the hall.
So this is fear of foreigners, right? This is the people like you, and for the benefit of those of you who only know Aggie through the radio, white young women with blonde hair like you should be having lots and lots of children.
More than 3,
because all of the brown people are having loads. I can't think what other explanation there could be for this.
Well, I suppose the only counter to it could be that they are just genuinely concerned about declining birth rates globally. But, that was one of the things talked about. And we can hear a little clip because I went around asking people why they're there, what the shared values they all kept on talking about were, and what had brought them all together.
In the Judeo-Christian values, which I guess you may be aware of, we all are commissioned by the Lord to love our neighbors and to honor the father and the mother, and to walk in a decent manner, to defend life from the very first ages, like conception, to the death. In the Judeo-Christian values, we feel an obligation to take a stand of defending our children from gender ideology and taking care of our homes, our families, and building a society that we can add value in it.
I think it is a broad church. I mean, I think the sort of common threads would be things like, probably a pro-capitalist sort of world in which there's a strong culture, strong identity of the nation, family. For a lot of people, faith is the center point of all of this.
I've talked a lot about how the West has somehow, with all its specializations, right, lost in that profession the connection between body and soul, and what is a human, what is life, what is health, and everything beyond the mere problematic, the symptom that we're seeing right now. And just I don't like the word holistic, but getting the spiritual back in touch with the physical.
In the mainstream media, we are constantly told that the climate is such a catastrophe and that we literally have to drive this economy to this country into the tip to save the planet. And I kind of don't really feel like there is an alternative version of events, an alternative opinion that is allowed to be voiced elsewhere.
I suppose people would say that's because kind of scientists have said that kind of climate change is destroying.
The scientists also did consensus that coronavirus didn't come out of Wuhan, whilst really later on it turns out that what the scientists were telling us were not actually the truth. So when we talk about the expert class, it really depends on which expert you talk about.
It's really nice to see like-minded people because I deeply support and share the values of this conference.
And what are the values of this conference?
We couldn't see them clearly written, but you can feel them in the lectures, in the people, in the conversations, and I believe these are the Christian values, the core Judeo-Christian values and the Western values.
Did you sign up? Did they manage to get you involved?
I don't think I have. I mean, I asked so many people, you heard a selection there, what those shared values were. And people kept just saying to me, Judeo-Christian values. Right. And I kept trying to understand.
What's the other Abrahamic religion that doesn't recognise Jesus as a Messiah? I think it begins with I. Can I put my finger to... So Judeo-Christian is an odd juxtaposition. It's sort of leaving one Abrahamic religion out of the equation entirely. But of course, only the Christians think that Christ was the Messiah. Islam. No one mentioned Islam. It's not the Judeo-Christian Islamic or the Abrahamic values.
No, they didn't.
Same God.
No, and I was then told by a volunteer after I'd been interviewing for people for a little while that I was making people feel uncomfortable, but I didn't really understand why. Because I was. Were
you sort of moving their cushions, or you?
I was just simply asking if they'd mind having a chat with me.
What are your values?
LBC,
you know what our values, and you didn't, and they couldn't tell you, and that made them feel uncomfortable. Because this is the same thing that I'm getting increasingly drawn to. This idea that there's freedom of speech is under threat, but I can't tell you what it is that I'm not allowed to say. We're here to celebrate our Western values. What are these Western values that distinguish you from other people, and how are they under threat? This is real. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a big picture of Kemi Badenoch with the words, "We must defend it. Conservatives are the guardians of Western civilization." This has come from their Twitter account. "The West is in a crisis made by its own weakness. To save it, we must reject self-doubt." Self-doubt's really good. I have to say this. I think if anyone in the current political sphere would benefit from a little bit of self-doubt, it's probably Kemi Badenoch. If she could just develop a degree of self-doubt, she'd stop making such an almighty fool of herself at PMQs and elsewhere every week. To save it, we must reject self-doubt, defend free speech, there it is again, secure our borders and restore national pride. That's what Kemi Badenoch is here to do. So that's very much of a piece with what you witnessed this week.
But maybe I'm being obtuse, James, but I still don't understand what that means. What does that literally mean on a kind of policy platform? They were in charge 8 months ago. I simply don't think...
but only for 14 years.
You're right, sorry. Only for 14 years.
What is it? The West is in a crisis of its own a crisis made by its own weakness. Presumably that only started 8 months ago.
Well, apparently so. But it's strange, isn't it? And it feels like it's all very much in the shadow of Donald Trump. They talked about Donald Trump quite a lot at this conference too. And then you've got Nigel Farage kind of jetting off to CPAC conference as well, making sure he gets the most out of 2 right-wing conferences. But I think what I thought was interesting was there were people, I mentioned there was a retired teacher from Washington, D.C., who said to me, I don't agree with everything that's being said here. I'm kind of trying to sieve out what I do agree with, what I don't agree with. And there are obviously differing opinions, although a lot of them talked about the shared values, but they feel they can talk about them. They feel they can have people who are much more on the fringes than others and have these conversations. And it does feel like,
So what do we ever hear? I want to have a conversation about something else. The benefits of self-doubt. You mentioned a former president of Hungary. Was it Katalin Novak?
It was the very same, who resigned in disgrace.
So she's asking people how many children they've had and applauding them for having lots of children, but had to resign, I think, live on television after it emerged that she'd pardoned a man convicted of covering up a massive child sexual abuse case.
Yes.
So those are the sort of values.
Those are the sort of values. And what I thought was interesting, if this was a Conservative Party conference, I think, if this was a Labour Party conference and you had people like that speaking and you had, you have Nigel Farage, you have Kemi Badenoch, from 2 different parties. You have Douglas Murray, you have the guy who interviewed Kemi Badenoch 2 weeks ago and then interviewed Fraser Nelson, who's a former Spectator editor, last week and had a conversation about whether or not Rishi Sunak
can't be English because he's
exactly
a Hindu.
If those people were speaking at Labour Party conference, I think that would be the entire story. The story being that there are people on the fringes being kind of let into the wings. And that doesn't happen. And I know that it's not a political party, but it is a conversation about the right. And no one blinked an eyelid. You had Michael Gove there, who's now the editor of The Spectator, but was, in the Tory fold, very close to Kemi Badenoch. But you had people who are not on the fringes of the right, who are not kind of on the extremes of the right. And then you had people that were all in this kind of melting pot in East London.
Legitimising, by turning up, really, the extremities, what you might have called the previously respectable characters. And it is extraordinary how often The Spectator pops up in these sort of spaces. Aggie Chambre, thank you. So that's 2 years going. Going for the hat-trick next year?
Absolutely.
What's the next one? What happened to the Nat Cons? Are they still going? The National Conservatives?
Pretty sure.
Because I tell you what, for people whose freedoms are being eroded, it's extraordinary how many massive international conferences they managed to have. And Nigel is at the one in America at the moment where Steve Bannon gave what appeared to be a fascist salute.
The very same.
God, imagine what they'd be doing if their freedoms weren't being suppressed and eroded in such an egregious fashion.